of my presentation today is advising for success, and I'm coming from a practitioner's perspective, because that's what I've been doing for the last little while. And I'm coming from a bias of having a holistic student support approach. So how do we define student success? Defining student success. So we have different type of definitions. So, maybe if we can take a minute to think about how you define student success. So some of the quick questions when you're defining student success is, what does student success mean for you? What constitutes student success? How do post-secondary institutions promote student success? How can student success be measured? And so there are a multiplicity of approaches to that notion of student success, because it's not just one-dimensional aspect, it has multi-dimensional aspects with some norm and some definition depending on who's defining it. Sometimes, like in the case of Kelma and Scott, it's a sequential map for transition. It's college readiness, college enrollment, college achievement, post-secondary attainment. For other models, such as for Baxter, we refer to as the markers of student success. So in that case, they focus on learning, don't say academic attainments, the acquisition of general education, the development of academic competence, development of cognitive skills, occupational attainment, preparation for adulthood and citizenship, personal accomplishment, or personal development. For Smart, Felden, and Effington, they actually emphasize on the administrators, the researchers, the leaders, and the faculty. And for them, this group of professionals should think student success within a specific context, such as the interests that the students have, their abilities, the value to promote and reinforce in prospective environment, academic environment, and also they also include some multiplicity of approaches to the study of student success. So, as you can see, it's very challenging to define student success. So, because it's not always easy to understand the relationship and the connection between the various approaches. And it's also often people work in disciplinary silos. So the disciplines don't talk to each other. So they don't really have that inter-exchange to integrate the different perspectives. And what is the importance for post-secondary institution for administration and faculty as well? So for Tinton Foster, they said it's very important because it's to scrutinize the institutional policy and the whole with in student success, and also the climate. So depending on the definition that an institution have, they also establish a climate in that institution. And it also defines the category of support, which type of support are needed to for students to be successful. And also ways to, it also help in having some feedback, having some markers for performance feedback and the values and the community activities, etc. So for Cool, Kinsey, Bridges, and Heights, some interventions are helpful to improve student outcomes. So they talk about early interventions, continued responsiveness during the academic pipeline, or just the connection to network within the actual post-secondary environment. Beyond schools, of course, you also have the larger communities, the families, the group that we might belong to, the government with the policies, etc., financial aid, and other type of external support. So those other factors that are impacting the institutions need to be really also reviewed in order to mitigate outside challenges that the student might have during their journey as students. So for the group of Canadian Alliance of Student Association have actually come up with a list of challenges during the, oh, sorry, there's a typo there, should be COVID, the COVID global pandemic and its impact on student life, including just the general hardship of being in this economic environment. And quite a few have lost their income. And that means they have the financial stability has been compromised. And also difficulty to study, to complete their studies because of different type of reasons, not having access to the classroom or going online, the fact that suddenly classes went from being online to on site to online, and the sense of feeling isolated, and also in terms of not knowing what will be the job perspective, prospect after they do graduate. And another big challenge that students have faced is actually the access to a reliable broadband, the internet, not only in the rural environment, but also in urban environment. I have heard students having to go to maybe a Starbucks trying to get a signal to have classes because they could not really access the internet. The demand was so high. And for some, it's just the lack of really childcare options that to have either with the work or school. And in my, I came across a very interesting tool that's actually used by the federal government. It's called the gender-based analysis. And this is a tool that's open source for the government. So it look at different aspects of a person's life. So this was not specifically to the higher education, but I think it would be a great tool that could be also useful as we're looking at student success. So for this prism, the idea is in order to have good results, you have to first identify what's the issue, and then challenge the assumption. Don't just go with the existing assumption, but what are the assumptions? Are those correct? Do they take into account the reality on the ground? And then gathering the facts, doing research and consulting, and then developing options, making recommendation, monitoring the evaluation, and making sure that you have excellent results for all of the diverse population. In this case, for the tour, it was the Canadian, but so this is also valid for students as well. And communicate that and have the in a loop and document and communicate. So what are the benefits of this approach for higher education? One of the things that it does, it gives an inclusive lens that provides the institution-wide a systemic approach to policies and programs, because it's not just one program that look individually into a silo, but all the programs are included, and we look at that the institution-wide response. It also helps understand that a response is not just one, it's just one aspect, it's different aspects. It's the classroom, it's outside the classroom, it's the student's ability. It's all those information are actually important. And the decision makers are also going beyond just the assumption that they have, in making their policies. So they are actually looking at the real life experience feedback that they get from the students, and how those who are the most impacted can also participate in this process. So the assumption then includes not only gathering the information for all the stakeholders, but in order to have actually a great sense of what's going on, but it also gives a sense of what are the issues, so that you can develop options and make recommendations that are really useful. And because sometimes we don't really have a clear process in our own system, our own environment. And it's also good to have a type of framework that's useful for staff training or for program evaluation as well. Maybe having a checklist, based on did include all those different aspects of the GBA. It could be gender, it could be just to make sure that everything is included, so you can always do the evaluation in a more systemic way. So for part of the challenge, why this is important, because student retention, although I don't like the word retention, I prefer persistence, but that's the common word that's used. Student retention, because historically, it's because it was just the academic and that was developing goal, and was looking at the student financial issues and some institutional financial challenges. So then the response was to develop intervention for those who are economically disadvantaged, underrepresented women, etc., etc. But those programs included counseling, career center, potential employee forum, and financial aid. But when you're looking at a more holistic approach, you have a more intention in what you're doing. You focus on the service and you deliver, and you're making connections. So what are the services? You align them with the needs and resources that are not just inside the classroom, but everything that's outside the classroom. Academic advising and planning. So looking at the transfer, what are the most effective way to have student with the transfer? Focusing on the schedule. So is the student, the adult learners, are they better off having an evening class or weekend class or weekday? Is it a Friday? So etc. So that becomes very important. And also it's important to have them with career coaching and planning, because if sometimes the students who are trying to change for maybe career, so just helping them find that path where they're going. And another thing for adults is knowing they usually train, they go to school to also have, be able to work. So having that workforce training is also important. The financial coaching, and most schools don't teach you about how to deal with your finances. So being able to also have the coaching and the planning, it's helpful. And just having access to all the benefits, including transportation, childcare, etc. So often, in order to be able to have that holistic approach, we have to think about a more transformative way to deal with our approach. Because the idea is not just to have students today, but in order to be able to sustain the outcomes over time. So that means the structure sometimes have to be organized. The policies, we have to employ more long-term policy. A lot of institutions tend to think about just short-term, today, what's it tomorrow, but not on the long term. So having both sustainability today, but also within a long-term perspective. So one of the process, among the process is seeing also the advising function as also a teaching, because we're helping students to learn new skills. And also looking at some case management. How can we, based on the experience, assist students and support them in what they do? So I have a few more options, but I think I'm running almost out of time. So maybe I'm gonna just go to one aspect I didn't touch is also level data and technology, because that's very important nowadays. For example, when students went into the virtual environment, the technology was very important to help in that sense. So trying to make the best out of the data that we have, out of the technology to also help support students be creative in how we use that technology. So in conclusion, a holistic student support approach is a student focus culture. We focus on the student needs and experience, use multiple ways to respond to those needs. And also it provides a seamless, personalized, and collaborative experience for students, because not all the students are molded in one. So having that flexibility to understand the need of specific student. A student with disability might need a different type of accommodation. A student coming from, it could be based on family situation, could be, so it's just trying to provide that experience from the time they come all the way to graduation during that journey, to, among other, improve the academic performance, but also just the life outcomes in general. And thinking also about equity for students who have been historically underserved. We know that, for example, it could be some coming from minorities, have not always been fully represented in academia. And so sometimes there are some subtle things that we don't always take into account, but keeping that in mind as we are assisting students. And it's, you know, I think I mentioned that before, it's a campus-wide collaboration. So we look at the impact on policies, processes, structure, and also really shifting the institutional culture to be student-centered. So and making changes where necessary. It's not always easy because it's easier to behave the way we have always been. But when we think about the student at the center, I think we see things differently. And also capitalize on the staff and faculty. We know that the staff, faculty, and students. So they also have a lot of, if you have a diverse population, they also bring a lot of experience and might influence the policies and the practices that we have in the system. So listening to our staff and faculty is also important. And keep on just replacing or revising processes. So we should not take for granted that what we have today is what should stay tomorrow. So just keep on just reviewing based on what we're learning. Yeah, so I think I'm gonna leave it to this. And so hopefully this has been an interesting short experience. And in summary, I'll just resume again what the GBA framework. So being just having a center where we are responsible for students, and we so we look at the assessment, we assess the needs, and not just in the classroom, but outside of the classroom. And so we create our policies based on what our assessment, and we provide maybe training and tools for students and for our staff. And perhaps we start with a pilot and see how we can improve and monitor it, and just keep on doing to go to that loop, and learning from others as well. So networking, I forgot to mention that. So networking with others, such as in this case, we have the PDGIA, who has organized this actually conference. And I have been a member of the PDGIA, and I have seen how working together has made a difference. There is actually a group that meets that deal with student services, and we, by exchanging best practices, we see an advancement and betterment of all of the institutions that are participating. So thank you for attending this session.